Yeah. So we have discussed about different standards in the last class. So I think now what is left for us, the financial instrument and the revenue, right? So we'll just look into it. Just wait 1 minute. So in the last class, we have discussed till sale and leaseback, no? The last class, I think we have ended up with sale and leaseback. Okay, perfect. So now we'll move on to the standard, which is IAS 21. So next we are going to discuss about the standard IAS 21. So what we are actually discussing in the standard IAS 21. So the standard is for accounting for the effects of changes in forex, that is foreign exchange rate. Okay, so effect of change in foreign exchange rate, that's what we are discussing in the standard IAS 21. So with respect to this standard, we need to know that obviously every company will have a presentation currency and they do have investments in the foreign currencies. So they might have some foreign receivables or payables, or they might be having investment in a foreign subsidiary, isn't it? So these are the different investments, these are the different types of foreign transactions that can appear in the affairs of any company. So now the question here is, how will you convert this foreign exchange transaction into your home currency? So on initial recognition, we'll use the exchange rate. At the date of transaction. So initially, when we recognize something in our books, okay, we will transfer it at the historic date. So what do you mean by historic date? The rate at which the transaction takes place. Is it clear? So in IAS 21, first of all, we are going to discuss about the initial recognition. So in the initial recognition, we'll consider the fact that when we initially record a foreign transaction, or when we have to convert a foreign transaction into a home currency, which rate we have to use? We will use the rate as on the date of transaction. We'll use the rate as of the date of transaction. So we'll use the date as on the date of transaction. And sometimes even we can use average rate. We can use average rate as well. Especially for converting items related to SOPL, such as depreciation, impairment, because these are items for a period of time, right? The expense, it's an expense for the period. Or income, this is for the period, right? So such kind of cost we'll use, it's appropriate to use average rate. If the exchange rate does not fluctuate significantly, then we can use the average rate. So these are the two type of rates that we normally use to convert these foreign items into your home currency. Are you getting it? So we have average rate as well as we can use the exchange rate at the date of transaction as well. Is it clear? Then subsequently, that is in the subsequent, once we report in the FS, in the subsequent period, subsequently, when we recognize this items in SOFP, we'll have two splits. We may have two splits here. So what are the two splits? First one, there is something known as monetary items. So what do you mean by monetary item? We have discussed about non-monetary item and monetary item when we are discussing about when we had a discussion on IAS 38. Do you remember that? Do you remember? Okay, so just tell me what do you mean by monetary items, guys? Yes, yes. So what do you mean by monetary item? Can you reply in the chat? Items which have a definite value, such as receivables, payables. These items have a definite value. So for converting these monetary items, we'll use the exchange rate as on the closing date or reporting date. So if you want to convert any receivable balance or payable balance or anything which can be termed as a monetary balance, at the reporting date in SOFP, when we have to report it, we will use the exchange rate as on the closing date or as per your reporting date. Are you getting it? Perfect. And there is something known as non-monetary items as well. So what can you give me an example of non-monetary item? Yes, we have many, right? Inventory, building, land. These items are example of land, inventory, buildings, intangible assets. These all are examples of non-monetary asset. So if you are using non-monetary asset, then this non-monetary asset are of two types. Either they will be using, they are non-monetary asset which are using cost model, as well as they are non-monetary asset which are using fair value model. Okay. So if you have a non-monetary asset which is using cost model, if they are using cost model, then in that scenario, the exchange rate at the date of transaction will be used. So let's say we have purchased the land. So in that scenario, the land will get translated to the home currency using the historic rate or the rate as on which the rate at which we have actually purchased the asset. On the date of transaction, what was your exchange rate? We will use that exchange rate for the conversion. So we can literally say that we will use the historic rate there. But if you are using fair value model, if it's a fair value model, we know that if it's a fair value model, then the value will keep on changing, right? The value will keep on changing. So in that scenario, if you're using a fair value model, such as a revaluation or a fair value model, such items, and for that items, the exchange rate, the date of revaluation will be used. The exchange rate as on the date of revaluation will be used. Is it clear, everyone? Okay. Now the question here is, if there is any gain or loss happens with respect to the exchange rate movements, where will you consider it? Where will you account it? Yes, we'll account it as a part of your P&L. So if there is any kind of exchange rate movements, then we'll account this movement in the P&L. Is it clear, everyone? So these are the main adjustment you have to learn with respect to IAS 21. Apart from that, even you should remember how will you identify the functional currency. How will you identify the functional currency? How to identify the functional currency, guys? How will you identify the functional currency? Can you reply in the chat? How will you identify the functional currency? We have got two different approaches. So for initially, we'll consider some primary factors. Then if the primary factors not giving a good results, then we will consider the secondary factors. So we have two types of factors, that is primary factors and secondary factors, to find the functional currency. So the functional currency means the currency of the primary economic environment. That's what I mean by functional currency. So no, normally students have assumption that the companies, wherever the company's headquarters is situating, that country's currency will be a functional currency. No, that is not the functional currency. The home country is not your functional currency. Okay, the functional currency is the one in which environment we are actually working economically, like the operating cash flows, or the labor cost, or the different costs which we incur. After considering these factors, will determine the fact that what's your functional currency. So functional currency literally means it's the primary economic environment in which the company operates. So how will you identify it? So as I've told, we have got primary factors and secondary factors. The primary factors will include the currency that mainly influences the sale price for goods or services. The currency that mainly influences the sale price for goods and services. Is it clear? That's an example for functional currency. Then, can you give me another example for other factor for determining the functional currency? The currency of the country whose competitive forces that will mainly determine the sale of goods, the sale price of goods and services. So which country's competitive forces will affect the selling price of our goods and services? The currency of the countries whose competitive forces and regulations that mainly determine the sale price of my goods and services. And finally, the currency in which we will incur our costs, such as labor, material, and other costs of providing the services and goods and services. So these are the primary factors that we'll consider to determine the functional currency. These are the primary factors that we'll consider to determine our functional currency. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? Any doubts? Is it clear, everyone? Any doubts, guys? Okay. So these are the primary factors that we'll consider to determine the functional currency. So from IAS 21, sometimes we can get the questions. You'll get a scenario and you'll be asking the examiner to identify the functional currency. So we have to consider these factors. So these are the primary factors. So if you are not able to identify it with the help of the primary factors, then we'll try to find it using secondary factors. So what are the secondary factors? The currency in which, so from the currency from which we'll actually receive the receipts of our operating activity. The currency in which will receive operating activity as well as the currency from which funds from or financing activities. Is it clear? So we have got two types of factors. So we can consider two different types of factors to determine the functional currency. Either we can focus on the primary factors or we can focus on the secondary factors. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat? All of you, please reply in the chat. Is it clear? So that's it for IAS 21. So that's it for IAS 21. Yeah. Okay. So next one, we are going to discuss about the standard IFRS 15. Next one, we are going to discuss about the standard IFRS 15. So in the standard IFRS 15, from the F7 perspective, you can just simply go through the five-step model. So what are the five-step model? What are the five-step model? First one, identification of a contract. So let's say you are going to purchase a car. Okay, so you'll have an agreement with your supplier. So in that particular contract, they will explain about the rights and responsibilities of both parties, the terms of the payment, okay, and what all includes in that, but the responsibilities will be explained there, whether it is probable that they will receive the consideration, okay, and they should have a profit element, okay. That means that the transaction should have a commercial substance. So these are the different factors we need to consider when we are recognizing the first step, that is identification of a contract. So identify whether there is a contract or not. That is your step number one. Is it clear, everyone? Identify a contract. That is step number one. Can you reply in the chat? Yes. Next one. What is step number two? What is step number two? Once we identify the contract, the next step is identify separate performance obligation. So here, let's say they have told that with the car, they will provide 3 years service as well. So 3 years free service. So in that scenario, does it mean that the only performance obligation for them is just the car, or is just or we have to identify the service and the obligation to deliver the car? We have to identify this responsibilities as two separate performance obligation, or we have to identify it as a single contract? How will you account for it? How will you account for it? Can you reply in the chat? So in this scenario, I have told that you're going to purchase a car, and along with the car, they are providing the service as well. So service is something that is separately or is something that we can see as a distinct item, because the company used to provide the service separately for a charge. It is not dependent. So it's not dependent on the car. Service is something that we provide as an extra product. Okay, so we have to identify it as two separate products here. Okay, so when we are delivering the car, even if we are giving the service for free, how will you account for it? In that scenario, you will have two separate performance obligation. For example, the car and after sale service. Okay. So we need to account for the revenue for car as well as for the after sale service, because there is two separate performance obligation. So from the perspective of a supplier who is providing, who is taking this car, who is selling this car, he will not recognize the revenue, the whole amount of revenue from this contract for the car, because here we have offered car and service. So we need to identify it as two separate performance obligation, because these performance obligations are distinct. Are you getting it? So that is step number 2. Identify how many performance obligations are there. Are you getting it, guys? Let's say you have a contract to build a hospital. With respect to the construction of hospital, you have to make the building and you have to construct the whole building, and you have to install equipments, then painting, then wiring. This all needs to be, the electrician works, everything needs to be done. So how many performance obligations are there in this contract? Is it multiple contract? Is it like a multiple obligation or a single obligation? You have entered into a contract to construct a hospital. And these are the responsibilities you have. You have to make the building, install the equipments, electricity, wiring, plumbing, and all these stuffs. Then fitting of your equipments, everything needs to be done. Painting. So how many performance obligations are there in this contract? It's just one or multiple? One. Why? Because your object, even though they are distinct, all services are distinct. Here, as per the contract, our objective is to construct the hospital. So whatever the works that we do, that is building, the other works that we have to do apart from it, comes as a part of that single contract. Are you getting it? So it's always, you have to read the question properly and identify how many performance obligations are there, because you can get the questions like that. And next step is determination of transaction price. So how will you determine the transaction price? When we determine the transaction price, we have to consider certain items. So if there is any variable consideration, we need to consider it. So what do you mean by variable consideration? Let's say, especially with respect to e-commerce, they used to give refund policy. If you don't want the item, you can sell it, refund it. You can ask for the refund. If you can sell it back return it back within 8 days or 10 days. So there are certain criteria. So in that scenario, let's say you have sold 100 products, and from your past experience, you came to know that 90% stands that there is a 90% of the products which you have sold, there is no chance of getting it returned. There will not be a sales return. But with respect to the 10%, we have seen that it used to get, we used to account it as a sales return. We have seen that almost 10% of our total sales will come back as sales return. So we have to refund it. So in that scenario, that 10% is like a variable consideration. So can you consider it? Can you recognize the revenue for the whole 100 products? If you're selling 100 products, can you recognize the revenue for the whole 100 products? No. We can only recognize the revenue for that 90% of the product that you have sold. We cannot recognize the revenue for that 10% because it's a variable consideration. Are you getting it? Okay, so variable consideration means we are not sure about the fact that will you receive it or not. In that scenario, we need to consider the probability of receiving that amount, only that how much percentage it is probable. Only that probable percentage of revenue needs to be recognized. Is it clear, guys? Can you reply in the chat? So variable consideration means we are not sure about that consideration. There are some contingency related to it. So we need to consider the probability of percentage of revenue that we are almost sure. Okay, this much percentage is sure, but there is another percent, there is 10% we are unsure whether we need to recognize revenue or not. So in that scenario, we should consider the probability of receiving the consideration, and only on that basis we can recognize the revenue. So we need to consider variable consideration when we determine the share transaction price. In the same way, if there is any discounts or something that you offer, you need to deduct it. Then sometimes there will be consideration payable to the customer. So what do you mean by consideration payable to the customer? Let's say you have a construction of a building going on, and you may have given certain time limit. Maybe within 2 years, I will complete this building. But in the contract, it's written that if it exceeds that time period, then the construction company needs to pay. So that is known as consideration payable to customer. And if it is highly probable that you won't be able to complete the project on time, and if you have to pay the penalty, then how will you, can you account it as a part of your revenue? No. So that penalty should be deducted from your transaction price. So from that contract price, we need to deduct that penalty. That penalty should be deducted from the transaction price to determine it. Is it clear, everyone? And in the same way, if there is any financing effect. So financing effect means, let's say if there is a 1 year or 2 year difference between the delivery of the asset and the date on which we'll receive the cash. So there is a timing difference, right? So as a result, if you're able to receive 2 million after 2 years for a sale of a product, so in that scenario, we can only recognize the revenue at the present value of this 2 million. We have to record so in that scenario, the present value of future consideration should be taken, and we'll record it as your revenue. Are you getting it? Okay. So these are the factors we need to consider when we determine the transaction price. And next one we have once we determine the transaction price, next one is this allocation of this transaction price to separate performance obligation. So we need to allocate the transaction price to separate performance obligation. So let's say in our situation, we have two performance obligations, that is car and after sales service. So whatever the transaction price is, we need to allocate that revenue between the car and the after sales service on the basis of its individual standalone Are you getting it? Can you reply in the chat, guys? Then finally, the last step, recognize revenue at the point of time or over a period of time. The last step is recognize revenue at the point of time or a period of time. It depends upon the fact that how we'll transfer the control. So this revenue recognition will depends upon the fact that how we will transfer the control, either at the point of time or over a period of time. So this is the 5-step model of recognizing revenue. So it will give a proper clarity about the timing and the nature of the transaction and the percentage of amount we can recognize as a revenue. So there won't be much mistakes with respect to revenue recognition, because that's a very important line item with respect to P&L. So if there is any kind of misstatement with respect to your revenue figure, the whole P&L will get manipulated, right? So it's very important to understand the revenue recognition model. So this is a 5-step model for recognizing revenue. It's a 5-step model. So ALA used to have another standard, that is IAS 18. So we have an IAS 11 for accounting for construction contracts. So now we have merged it into IFRS 15, which is revenue from contract with customers. Are you getting it? So it's not like we are treating it separately. It's like obviously the inventory will be recorded at a particular cost. No, that cost account will get accounted in the cost of sales. The inventory will reduce, so it will be debit to cost of sales and credit the inventory at cost. The revenue can be only considered to the present value of that consideration receivable. That's it. Okay, so guys, just go through it. Just 5 minutes. I will just go through that. Just read that 5-step model, and if you have any doubts, you can reply in the chat. We'll just come back within 2 minutes. So can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, guys. So this is the first main part we have to learn with respect to IFRS 15 from F7. So they can test any of these steps in your revenue recognition part. And apart from this, in F7, we need to know about the principal agent relationship. So the principal agent relationship says that when we recognize revenue, we can only recognize revenue for if you're an agent, if you're acting as an agent, our revenue should be how much we should record as revenue there. If you're acting as an agent, our revenue will be the agency fee. It will be your agency fee, or what else will be your revenue?
Commission.
Yes, commission. So if you're acting as an agent, our revenue will be the agency fee or the commission, because we need to identify it from a transaction. What are the different factors, or right, like different factors or conditions from which we can figure it out whether we are whether we are just acting as an agent. Let's say the risk of the obsolescence in our inventory, or the risk related to the credit risk, that is whether the customer will pay you the amount. This all risk and rewards will not be our responsibility. So what does it mean to say that we don't have any responsibility with respect to the obligation of transferring the goods or service? We are just acting as an intermediary between the supplier and the customer. And we don't have any responsibility with respect to the credit risk or the inventory obsolescence or the inventory risk. We are not responsible for any of this risk. In that scenario, we'll account for it. We'll account for the revenue as per IFRS 15. But since you're acting as an agent, you cannot recognize the whole amount of consideration as your revenue. Your only revenue should be the agency fee or the commission. Are you getting it? Okay, so there might be questions where the company will recognize the whole gross consideration as your revenue, but since you're acting as an agent, we are only having the rights to the agency fee or the commission. So whatever the transaction fee that you will get for acting as an agent, that's the only amount we have to recognize as a revenue in your P&L. Is it clear, everyone? Perfect. So next one is about construction contracts. So when we recognize the revenue, as I've told that we can either recognize the revenue at the point of time or over the period of time. So especially, I'm not giving a conclusion that it will be applicable for every construction contracts, but normally if it's a construction contracts, and if you have the right to receive the payment after each stage of your completion. So after each stage of the completion, or maybe in every year or after a certain stage, the contract will be, especially the construction will be completed in stages, right? So after each and every stages, if you are having the rights to receive the receipt for the work which you have done till date, then we'll recognize the revenue over the period of time rather than at the point of time. In that scenario, the revenue will be recognized over a period of time rather than at the point of time. Yeah, Jane, like what's your doubt? Yeah, sometimes it can be like it will be defined in the, it will be explained in the question on what terms the agency fee is getting collected. Okay, fine. So especially with respect to construction contracts, and we have to check the fact that whether you are eligible to receive the payments after on the base of your completion. Okay, you have the right to receive the receipts for the work you have completed till date. Then we can recognize the revenue. Okay. So how will you recognize the revenue here? Here we will recognize the revenue over a period of time. So when we recognize the revenue over a period of time, we'll calculate the revenue on the basis of percentage of percentage of completion. On the basis of percentage of completion, we'll recognize the revenue. On the basis of percentage of completion, we'll recognize the revenue. Are you getting it? Or on the basis of the performance obligation satisfied till date, only for that percentage of completion, we can recognize the revenue. Yes. So whenever it's a construction contract, the first step is we need to check whether the project is profitable or not. We need to check whether the project is profitable or not. How will you check whether the project is profitable or not? Simply you have to compare the consideration, the total contract price, that is the contract price, with the total cost of completion. The total cost of completion. Okay. So let's say that's your first step. Okay, it's your first step. That is step 1. So there are two situations. Either it will result in a profit or it will result in a loss. Right? So either this project will be profitable or it at the start itself we'll get to know that the cost is higher than the contract price, then it will result in a loss. So in that scenario, the profit or loss needs to be charged to your P&L, right? But if it's a profitable project, then we cannot recognize the whole profit immediately to the P&L. We should calculate the percentage of completion, and on the basis of percentage of completion, we will charge the profit to the P&L. So how will you calculate the percentage of completion? We have got two different methods, which is output method and input methods. In output methods, we will be using the output, that is the price, as well as in input methods, we will consider the cost. So how will you calculate the output methods? Especially for output method, the equation will be given in the question. So one of the example being work certified to date divided by total contract price. So that's the output method. That will give you a percentage of completion. Clear? Next one. And in input methods, it depends upon the cost. Okay, so it is cost to date divided by total cost of completion. So it is cost to date divided by total cost of completion. That will give a percentage of. Is it clear, guys? Okay. So we have got two different methods to account for the percentage of completion. So if it's a profitable project, if the project is profitable in that scenario, we have to calculate the percentage of completion, and on the percentage basis of percentage of completion, we'll recognize the revenue and profit in your P&L. But if it's a loss, how will you account for it? Initially, we'll came to know that it's a loss. Then how will you account for it? The starting itself, we came to know that it will result in a loss. Then how will you account for it? If it's a loss, so if it's a loss, then the whole amount will be recognized immediately in SOPL as per which concept? As per prudent concept. So as per prudent concept, then the whole amount of loss should be immediately recognized in your P&L. Are you getting it? Can you reply in the chat? Yes. But if it's profit, it's a profit, then we can only recognize the profit for the performance obligation satisfied till date. We can only recognize the profit for the performance obligation satisfied till date. Is it clear, everyone? Can you reply in the chat, guys? So once we calculate the percentage of performance obligation, the next step is preparing the extract for SOPL. So when we prepare the extract of SOPL, it is revenue. We have to calculate the revenue. The revenue will be the total contract price multiplied by the percentage of completion. Okay. Less the cost of sales. Less cost of sales. The cost of sales will be total cost multiplied by the percentage of completion. The total cost will include the cost to date and whatever the cost which is left to complete, yet to incur. That's how we'll calculate the cost of sales. Then you will get the gross profit. So this is the SOPL extract if the project is profitable. Okay. Let's say if the project is not profitable, in that scenario, if the project is not profitable, in that scenario, how will you account for it? Can you reply in the chat? The revenue will be accounted as we have seen earlier. The step for revenue will be same, that is revenue will be contract price into percentage of completion, but the cost of sales will be a balancing figure, and the whole loss which you have calculated in step number 1, the loss from step number 1, the whole loss will be recognized immediately in the SOPL. So if it's a loss, then we have to recognize the whole amount immediately to the SOPL. If it is a profit, then we can only recognize the revenue on the basis of percentage of completion, and the total cost also will be allocated on the percentage of completion, and we will calculate the net profit. But if the project is not profitable, then when we prepare the SOPL extract, we can only recognize the revenue for the percentage of completion, and there the cost will be a balancing figure because we need to allocate the whole loss immediately to P&L. Are you getting it? Can you reply in the chat, guys? Yeah, if there is no percentage of completion C1, we can recognize the revenue till whatever the cost incurred till date, we can recognize it as revenue. Consider the fact that we have to read the question completely, and if the question says that all these costs are recoverable, then we can recognize the whole amount. Whatever the cost we have incurred till date, we can recognize it as revenue. Okay. Okay. So once this extract of SOPL is complete, now next one is extract for SOFP. So when we prepare the extract for SOFP, it will be cost incurred to date, then plus profit, or if it is loss, then we have to deduct because we cannot charge it from the customer. So cost incurred to date plus profit or minus loss. If you do that, you will get the amount of receipt due from the customer. Okay, so from that we'll deduct less the amount which is invoiced or billed. We'll deduct this figure. Okay. So cost incurred to date plus profit is the amount which you are eligible to receive from the customer. We'll deduct it with the amount which is invoiced or billed. The same way, if it's a loss, then the total cost incurred to date minus the loss. Okay. Because we cannot charge the loss from your customer. So that loss should be deducted. Then finally you will get, let's say, if the amount due from the customer will be, for example, if it is 1,000 and we have only billed how much? 800. In that scenario, okay, what does it mean by it? We have the right to receive another 200 from the customer. The amount due from the customer is 200. So this 200 will be accounted as a contract asset. This 200 will be accounted as a contract asset. Is it clear, guys? Let's say if the amount due from customer is 1,000, but we have billed for 1,200. So then it will create a contract liability. Then it will lead to a contract liability. So that's a question scenario where we have billed for 1,200, but actually we are only eligible for 1,000. So in that scenario, it will be a contract liability. So the contract asset will be recorded as a current asset in your SOFP, and the contract liability will be recorded as a current liability. Is it clear, everyone? Okay, fine. So next one we'll discuss about next one. The important standard will be IAS 12. So today we'll complete all important standards. So whatever which is left, the small standards, I'll give the recordings for it. Okay. So why are they saying to use the new? Yeah, from tomorrow we'll be doing. So tomorrow the whole section will be about question practice. We'll do some past papers. Okay, so if you have any doubts in IFRS 15, you can ask me. Okay, guys. So then we'll move on to IAS 12. So in IAS 12, basically we have current tax as well as deferred tax. So first of all, we'll discuss about current tax. So what do you mean by current tax? Current tax is the amount charged to P&L amount charged P&L sorry yeah, so nowadays like even we have started to use another method, that is revenue minus amount paid, because they assume that at the end of the day revenue is the, we are only recognizing the revenue for the percentage of completion, percentage of the percentage of the work completed, right? So it is appropriate to use the new method as well, because in some of the MCQs we have seen that they started to use the same formula. So instead of using the cost plus profit, you can use revenue, and revenue will get deducted from the amount or the bill invoiced, and it will get compared with the bill invoiced to get contract asset or liability. So that's a change happened. Okay. Concept wise, both are same. Okay. So when we calculate the current tax, so what do you mean by current tax? The current tax is the amount charged in the P&L with respect to the taxable profit in SOPL. Okay. So how will you calculate the current tax? The current tax will include the tax charged for the year plus we have to adjust for the under provision, and if it is over provision, then we have to do it. Yeah. So if it is under provision, we will add it. We'll add it with the current year's tax charge. So what do you mean by under provision? The last year we have estimated a tax expense, but it was lower than what it is agreed with the tax authority. We know that we will be paying tax in arrears, right? So the last year we expected the tax expense to be 1 lakh. Let's say 1 lakh. And in the current year, we have received a bill from the tax authority saying that your tax invoice is how much? 1,50,000, or let's say 1,20,000. So in that scenario, we have only estimated the tax charge of 1 lakh in the last year, but the amount agreed with the tax authority is 1,20,000. So how will you account for that 20,000? That 20,000 will be recorded as a expense in the subsequent period. That is, in the current year, we'll charge it to the P&L. Is it clear? So that is known as under provision because we have provided a lower amount in the last year. So we have to provide an additional expense right now. Is it clear, everyone? Then what about over provision? Over provision means in the last year, we have created a higher amount of provision for tax. But in the current year, we came to know that no, the tax expense is lower than what we have actually expected. The amount agreed with the tax authority is lower than what we have actually expected. Yes. So in that scenario, that additional expense will be deducted from your current year's tax expense. So the current tax calculation will include the tax charge for the year, that is current year's taxable profit multiplied by the percentage of tax plus under provision minus over provision. Is it clear, everyone? Yes. So that's how we'll account for the current tax. That what is deferred tax? What do you mean by deferred tax? Let's say because of the way that a single item, for example, entertainment expense, how will you account for the entertainment expense in your SOPL? Will you charge it to P&L? Yeah, reserve from taxable temporary difference. Yes. So let's say if there is an entertainment expense, how will you account it in your P&L? Will expense it off, right? But what about the tax authority? Will they allow entertainment expenses? No. The tax authority won't allow such entertainment expense. They will ask you to add it back. Okay. So the entertainment expense will get deducted in SOPL as an expense so that the profit will go down, the taxable profit will go down. But the tax authority will use in their tax books, they will calculate a new profit. Okay. It's not the accounting profit. They will calculate the taxable profit. So when they arrive at the taxable profit, they used to make some adjustments. So they will take this accounting profit, which you have calculated. So they will make the adjustments. So one of this adjustment being, let's say, for example, if there is an entertainment expense in your SOPL, in your books, it's an expense, but for the tax authority, it's not an expense. Tax authority will ask you to add it back. Literally, you have to pay tax for it. So what will happen there? The same item is getting treated in a different manner in the tax books as well as in our FS. So as a result, we have to pay a higher tax there. Okay. So there is a difference arises. There is a difference erased. But this difference is known as permanent difference. So there is a difference in the way we have accounted for the profit and the tax authority have accounted for the profit. But literally there is a difference, but this is a permanent difference because it's not going to get netted off anywhere in the future because they are not going to consider it as an expense even in future. Let's say the tax authority is not considering it as an expense the current year. If they're giving it as an allowance in the next years, then effectively we could have said it as a temporary difference. But now the difference is permanent. In that scenario, that mismatch will be there. So that cannot be avoided using any deferred tax treatment. But let's say we used to account for the depreciation, right? We used to account for something known as depreciation. So this depreciation will be charged to SOPL. Let's say you have an asset which is worth a 10 years useful life and we are depreciating it for 10 years. But the tax authority won't allow this depreciation. They will ask you to add back this depreciation and instead they will give you a allowance that is known as capital allowance. So they will give capital allowance for this same asset, let's say if it's a machinery, but they will account it in a different manner. For them, let's say they have accounted it for an asset which is having an economic useful life of 8 years. So they are giving this allowance only for 8 years. Or we can say that in other terms, this instead of saying capital allowance, the tax allowable depreciation. The tax allowable depreciation is only for 8 years, but the accounting depreciation is for 10 years. But at the end of the day, the whole amount of the machinery is getting expensed, even in my books as well as in the tax authority's books. But as a result, what will happen? There will be, for the time being, there will be a temporary difference. Temporary difference means, since I am depreciating this asset for 10 years, my depreciation charge will be a lower amount. But in the tax authority's books, depreciation charge will be a higher amount because they are depreciating the same asset for 8 years. So as a result, what will happen? There will be a difference between, let's say for this asset, there will be a difference between the carrying amount of this machinery in my books as well as the amount considered by the tax authority for tax purpose, that is known as tax base. Okay. And if we compare these two figures, there is a difference because we have charged the depreciation over a period of 10 years. So the carrying amount will be greater than tax base. The carrying amount will be greater than tax base. Is it clear? So there is a difference, and this difference is a temporary difference or a permanent difference. This will be a temporary difference. But this temporary difference will be taxable in future. So this is known as taxable temporary difference. So always understand that whenever it's an asset, and if it's for an asset, if there is a temporary difference, we need to check whether it's taxable or temporary. But if the carrying amount is greater than the tax base, literally we have to pay. Now it's like a benefit for us because we are getting more allowance. But we'll only get this allowance for 8 years. In year 9 and 10, we are not going to get the allowance. So during that time period, we have to pay extra tax in year 9 and 10. For now, we may feel it's like a benefit, but in future, we have to pay extra tax there. Are you getting it? So that's the reason it's a taxable temporary difference, because in future, this difference will get taxed. This now for the time being, we may feel it's like a benefit, but in future, it's a amount that we have to be taxable. So it will lead to taxable temporary difference. So in the same way, so if you remember, if you just understand this one concept, then literally in connection to it, we can learn the other stuff. So for an asset, we learned that for carrying amount greater than tax base, that difference is taxable temporary difference. And on this taxable temporary difference, we have to create a provision. So that is known as deferred tax. So it's a deferred tax expense. Okay, if it's a taxable temporary difference, it will lead to deferred tax expense. So it is debit, deferred tax expense, and credit will go to deferred tax liability. Are you getting it? So now with respect to the asset, if the carrying amount is less than tax base, so we know that if the carrying amount is greater than tax base, it's a taxable temporary difference. But if the carrying amount is less than tax base, then in future, will get some benefit. You don't need to pay higher tax in future. So that difference will be deductible in temporary difference. So deductible temporary difference multiplied by tax rate will lead to deferred tax asset. So it's in future, you are going to get an asset. So it's a deferred tax asset and credit will go to deferred tax expense because it will reduce your tax expense. So whenever you're calculating the tax expense, earlier we used to only consider the current tax part. So now with respect to this adjustments, now onwards, we have to include the adjustments for deferred tax as well. That is, we need to account the provision for deferred tax. That is taxable difference. It will be given in your question, multiplied by the tax rate, and you will get the tax expense. Then add. So we would have created the deferred tax in the opening. So we'll compare the opening balance with the closing deferred tax balance. Okay. So we will add the under provision for deferred tax of previous years, and we'll deduct over provision for deferred tax in previous years. You getting it? So it's not just the current tax part, we need to consider the deferred tax element also when we calculate the total tax expense. Is it clear? So after this, making this much adjustment, you will get the tax charge for the year. You will get the tax charge for the year. Is it clear, everyone? So with respect to asset, if the carrying value greater than tax base, then it's a taxable temporary difference. With respect to asset, if the carrying value less than tax base, then it's a deductible temporary difference. And there can be situation with respect to deferred tax arising on revaluation. So what happens when there is revaluation? So when there is revaluation, what happens? The carrying amount, the asset will be higher compared to tax base, right? Because that asset value will increase in my books, but that increase will not get reflected in the tax books because we are accounting it on the basis of your accounting policies and assumptions. But that is on the accrual basis. But literally, the tax authority is accounting it on the cash basis. Is it clear? So if the carrying amount of the asset will be literally higher compared to tax base here. Can you reply in the chat? Yes. So it will lead to taxable temporary difference. So this difference will lead to taxable temporary difference multiplied by tax rate. Will get debit deferred tax expense and credit will go to deferred tax liability. But the only difference will be that debit deferred tax expense will not charge this expense to P&L. It will get charged to OCI because revaluation is an item that will get accounted as a part of OCI. So the tax difference, the tax charge that we have incurred with respect to this revaluation should be recorded as a part of your OCI. So in the question, they have said that if there is any taxable temporary difference, and out of this taxable temporary difference, this much amount is with respect to revaluation, then that portion should not be accounted for calculating the tax charge in your P&L. Is it clear, everyone? Okay. Okay, so guys, so we have only one standard left, the main standard, that is financial instrument. So we have completed the other things. So with respect to this financial instrument, so since the bit lengthy standard, I will just give the recording because I can't complete it today. So I will just give the recording for the financial instrument. It will get shared in the group. Okay, I will just share the link there. You can just go through it. Okay. Okay, guys, so that's it for the day. So tomorrow we'll do the questions and we'll discuss about the consultation part.